Welcome. And here we are back with the Let's Get Real podcast. This is Canadian Perspectives on Fundraising, as what we talk about. I'm Lisa McDonald. I'm the editor of Hillborn Charity E-News. My co host is Ed Sluga of PG Growth. And we have a very special first time guest in the chair today, Leigh Sandison. Leigh, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here and to have this discussion with you. To lead off, I'm going to avoid some of our preamble. I would just love for you to tell our listeners tuning in a little bit about yourself and how you came to be doing the work that you're doing and what it is, that you're doing in philanthropy right now, before we even get into your topic.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Ed. And nice to meet you, Ed. 5 minutes ago. It was perfect. I'm very excited to be here. I'll just give you a little background on me. So 20 odd years ago, I was fundraising in the UK and spent 5 years doing really, really cool roles like in memory segment manager, innovation strategist, like very, very cool, interesting things in the UK. And then I came back to Toronto in 2011, and I couldn't find a job doing what I was doing in the UK here. It was all like extremely traditional fundraising, and I was very interested in like who people were and experience design and that kind of thing. So I went onto the corporate side and worked in corporate for 10 plus years, working with very big guys like Microsoft and LCBO and L'Oreal and, big major players who were spending lots of money to do this work. And then I was on mat leave through COVID with my son, my first mat leave. And my brother said, hey, he had been in fundraising this entire time. And he said, hey, we're doing a donor journey mapping project. And I know you do customer journey mapping. Can you come in and take a look at this? Yeah, no problem. And went over and I was like, oh, the way you guys are doing this is like how corporates were doing it 15 years ago. It's like, you need to come over here and let me tell you the secret about journey mapping is that you need to actually involve the people that you are doing the mapping about in the process. And it just made me realize that there was like a big gap in what was happening in the nonprofit space in Canada where people were talking about journey mapping, but they were really, really focused on their own internal perspective and not at all on the supporters' perspective, hearing from donors, all of that, and using that to inform how they were kind of changing that experience design. So that's me and where I started from and kind of what I'm doing now.
Yeah, super cool. And I've now, got, I've seen you in action, Leigh. I've got to hear you speak at a couple of conferences. And I know you're getting out there in the world and sharing some of the message of your learnings. And that's really what I wanted you to come and talk about with our audience and with Ed and I today is kind of, again, we can only kind of get into some of the broad concepts, a bit of the ideas, but I'd really love for you to just take us through a little bit of what you found and why supporter experience, for example, is something that goes actually further, than journey mapping. And maybe is that a good place to start with the conversation?
Totally. And this is one of my favorite topics right now. So fantastic. And it was really interesting. So I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was speaking at a conference that was based in the UK from Fundraising Everywhere. And it was the Supporter Experience Conference. Like they have a whole conference just about supporter experience in the UK. And here, people are barely talking about it. And it's an interesting time to be here because like for me, I'm like, okay, the UK is quite far ahead of us here. We can do a lot of learning and come very quickly to where they've spent decades getting to, just by kind of following suit and thinking about this. But for me, so journey mapping has been like a buzzword in the industry for the last 5 years or however long it's been, and it's very sort of one-dimensional. So people talk about this is the journey map for monthly giving. this is our journey map for like this event we're running. This is our journey for legacy giving. And what I'm trying to talk about and what like other people in supporter experience space are talking about is one level up from that. So what is the actual feeling that you're giving supporters, and how do you embed that through all of these various journeys that you have, and making sure there's consistency in that. And one of the sort of examples that I gave last week at the Canada's fundraising conference was I 11 years ago shaved my head, and for people listening, I have like really big curly hair. It's like a defining feature of me. So to shave my head is a big deal. And I raised over 25 grand for this organization. And they gave me a big check. It was all like this awesome thing. It was great. I did it off of GoFundMe. And then last year was like 10 years later from my mom passing away. And I raised another 10 grand. And there was no connection between these two experiences. And that's where supporter experience comes in. It's like the journeys for these two individual products were fantastic, and great time doing this ride and all of this. But the fact that they couldn't connect those things together was like a major gap in the experience, and made me feel like, oh, they don't care about me. So like, will I give them a legacy gift? Probably not. Yeah, so that's kind of the overview of supporter experience. And one of the things I was talking about with the supporter experience conference was like, what are the various things that fundraisers need to do? What are some of the sort of skill sets they need to have to get into this supporter experience mindset? And like, for me, the biggest one is curiosity. Is like, who are your supporters? And I'm saying supporters now and not donors, because the experience starts earlier than when people are donors. It's like right at the beginning, before they even find out who you are. It's like, how are they interested in what you're doing first? That's like the first phase. And then they're finding out about you. They're making initial judgments on who you are and what you do. And then they might volunteer, they might become advocates, and then they might become a donor. And it's like, you have to pull them through all of these phases and make sure that the experience is really strong and is seamless and gives them the feels that you want, so that they become donors and that they stay with you, and then they carry on with you for a lifetime of giving, as what we all want. So the first thing is being curious about who they are, what they want, the experience that you're currently having. And I always think it's funny. It's like, okay, how do we find this stuff out? It's like, just talk to them. They're people. They're people, just like we're people. Just have a chat with them, find out, ask them. And I always think it's funny. Like in my corporate world, I was working with the LCBO, and they were talking about labels for wine bottles, and like they're quite confusing, because it's like, okay, how many grams of sugar and all these various things that people are using to make decisions. And they were like, okay, like let's send out a survey and get this information. I was like, there's a store just downstairs. Like, let's just go and talk to people and ask them. And I think it's one of these funny things. It's like, data is so important now in our society. Like, it's so overwhelmingly prevalent that people forget that like the best way to find things out is by talking to people. And I tout that all the time, but being curious about what people are experiencing with you, I think, is like one of the biggest things. And then also for fundraising teams, it's like, you are not dealing with this person in isolation. They are being touched by your marketing team and by your advocacy team, and various steps along the way. So you have to make sure that everyone is sort of like collectively treating the supporter as one person, and not just being sort of like handed off without thinking through that.
Before I pull Ed into the conversation, because I'm really interested to hear, he's worked in legacy giving space for so long, and his experience with having this part of the conversation with organizations. But I have a quick question, Leigh. Do you get pushback to this idea of the personal contact, because it feels too slow and too cumbersome? it feels now a lot easier or more intuitive to just hit send on a survey monkey and get people to check some boxes and give you the answer.
Oh,
you know
totally.
are people just unwilling or uninterested in giving the time to do that? Like, what do
I
you
think, I
get
mean,
told?
I definitely think that people don't have the time. Like I would say it's not as much a disinterest. It's just that they're on the monkey wheel and it's like I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it. And so much of it is based on like what we did last year and we're just gonna like keep making this happen. So I think time is probably, or maybe not time as much as sort of the feeling of time, is like probably one of the biggest culprits. But I also think it's just like we're just tapping our phones all the time. Like there's just so much less space for these like personal relationships. I'll tell you a story. One of my clients, a big university in Canada, they had a fundraiser who was sort of like going through some personal issues, and she was like, you know what, I'm gonna every Friday afternoon, I'm gonna call donors because like I feel like I need to be more connected to people. I'm feeling a bit lonely. Like this is what I want. That fundraiser now raises more funds than anybody else on the team, and it's like, yeah, that's like we're so fearful of it. But it's like that's what's going to drive everything forward. And if we can get more back to like, the good old days, I dare say, then everyone feels more connected. And I always think it's funny, like any of these projects that I do, I will say when the organization is selecting like who they want me to interview, I'm like, be warned, I'm not asking people for donations, but these people will give more to you. So like, be thoughtful about your selections here.
Yeah. Ed, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
she gave you the segue. It's more, we need to be more like good old times. You know about good old
well,
times.
a couple of things. First and foremost, I just want to set the stage. With 85,000 charities in Canada, half of them being individual parishes, churches, synagogues, temples, that sort of thing. We get down to this other 42 and a half. Let's call it 45. That makes more sense. And then of the 45,000, about 40,000 are local charities, small, under 200,000, under $500,000. And frankly, all kidding aside, they're actually not mapping the donor journey, but they care about the donor journey because they have line of sight to their donor. They know who they are. They come to the events. They volunteer. Maybe they're a user. A family member is a user. They just by nature of who the charity is and where they actually reside, that personal feeling is there. It's intuitive. They're not purposely mapping it, as you say, Leigh, which is important, but they have it. It's really the 5,000 charities in Canada that are big, national, and they almost purposely, and I think you alluded to this, want to remain arm's length. It's like there's a whole bunch of people in front of their computers who don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
It's like I feel more comfortable looking at SurveyMonkey and sending that out, or looking at Instagram and engaging with the world that way, than I do going to speak to people. And by the way, there's a whole problem we have with young people coming in the fundraiser. They don't want to talk to anybody. You can't get them to call people because it's almost like they're afraid of the phone. Like they've gone 150 years back when Alexander Graham Bell made the phone, and now they're afraid of it for some reason. But so that's the group that I think is so needs to get on board with what you're talking about. And we used to say this in a very shorthand, which is the moment you acquire a new annual fund donor, you also acquire a new plan giving prospect. Now, it's the journey that gets you to them. They're going to drop off. And by the way, 100% of the new people you acquire, we might get 5% to become a donor at some point of a legacy gift. And that's a really interesting moment. So with the notion of us acquiring a plan giving prospect when we acquire a new donor. I think it sets up this notion of a map. How do we get them there? But you know what happens for me is, even though we talk about this, and I recall working with a very large organization that had 120 plus annual donors, and we did an analysis of their current donor base and how many of them can we bring along to a legacy gift, and what's the market opportunity. And it was a really educational moment for me, even though I knew this, because the market opportunity for that 120,000 donor community was well over $3 billion if they did their work well. But the CEO of the organization stopped and said, well, we support all Canadians. What's the entire opportunity in the entire country? And we had to stop it and say, hold on, let's go get the $3 billion first. And once you get all of that, then we can focus on everybody else in the country. And it just kind of shows this notion of acquisition being king, donor bases being ATM machines and not partners within the values and the mission of the organization. These are people we go to get money so we can do our thing. And what I love about this journey mapping notion, and of course it's called donor journey in some places, and various groups we've worked with have tried to implement this, but they run straight into this siloed way of approaching fundraising. So Tracy Church, a well-known prospect researcher in Canada, will talk about this. It's a basic thing. Your supporters don't think of themselves as an annual fund donor, monthly donor, major donor. They don't. They just think, I like this organization. It does great things. I want to provide support. But we internally decide to cut them all up. And then we decide to make sure no one gets in the way of our revenue generation line. And it's us. We're the folks that get in the way of this holistic approach. So I wanted to ask you, Leigh, if you can give us an idea of what came to the minds of our UK counterparts to say, oh no, we got to get away from this thinking, because I know that thinking was there. And
totally.
Something else. So what was it? Was there a moment to it? Did someone do this and they went out ahead of everyone else, and so everyone chased them? Because I do know that you think the UK and your experience there is well ahead of us here in Canada around this area. What prompted that?
Okay, I don't know what prompted it, to be totally honest. I don't know. But when I started with Macmillan Cancer Support, it was a very product-focused, product-first kind of fundraising view. So there was like a coffee morning team, a events team, a legacy team. It was all split up like that, and donors were looked at like that. And then something happened. I don't know what the catalyst was, but it was like, okay, these are people. They need to be treated like they're people, generally speaking, and we need to find out what they want to be able to understand what we're going to be able to move them through. And like one of the jobs I had there was the in-memory program manager. Macmillan did not have an in-memory setup at all. Their reaction to in-memory gifts was not to talk to people for 2 years after giving a gift. And this is they were cancer nurses. That was what they were doing. So you have this wonderful personal experience with this cancer nurse. You give a donation, and then they abandon you for 2 years. It was like, this just doesn't make sense. Anyway, so after going out and talking to people, we recognized that like we needed to flip this whole thing on its head. And moreover, in-memory gifts were coming from all these different places, and you can't set up product teams and have them separate. So having a consistent view meant that people could actually go through a journey in a way that made sense to them because of what their motivation was. And so in-memory supporters like had their own way of going through things versus other supporters, but they were sort of passed between teams very with attention. Which was just super important to actually have the supporter experience be high. And what was cool is that all of a sudden legacy giving was much easier to talk about, because you're treating the supporter as a person and not just like, you do this one thing for us. One of the other things I wanted to say about what you said before, Ed, was when you look at experience design, you can see these like falling off moments, and you know it's like, okay, let's say you have 100 people start this journey with you. If there's a blip, then now you have 90, and there's another blip, and now you have 80. Of course, legacy prospects are only 2 people out of that 100, because you've had all these moments that didn't meet them where they were. And if you can clean that up and smooth it out, all of a sudden you might not have 100, but you might have 60. Like it can be thought, a lot more if you just like be really thoughtful about the transitions. And I think one of the other things that I think about a lot is my projects always have the marketing team involved as well. It's never just fundraising, because the journeys don't start with become a donor. They start with, who is this organization? How are you talking to me? Subscribing to newsletters, whatever it is, checking out your Instagram. That's what's going to help people understand if they want to become a donor or not. And if the marketing team is doing one thing and fundraising is doing another, like it's always going to feel like it's divided. So that's why we're really talking about experience. Anyway, I went way adrift from your original question.
Look, and there's a couple of examples I often use, but one they come from various different experiences in society. One of them, as much as I will often criticize some of our financial services friends, if you look at a bank and think about that journey, that client journey mapping that they're looking at, they want to get you into a bank account early, but that bank account actually is a lost leader for them. They want you to move along with as you grow and bring things like your mortgage, your credit cards, your investments, you bring them in. But as you start developing or moving into some of those services, I won't call them products, I'll call them services, differing groups of people start talking to you. Once your paychecks start getting bigger, once your investment portfolio gets bigger, you get passed on through this client journey. And we don't do that. We try to kind of keep people over here. We don't want to lose monthly donors. My revenue will go down. And so we try to keep them sequestered over here rather than allowing them to move forward. Also, we don't like hierarchies in charity. So frankly, the Major Gift Legacy Giving team is looking into our donor pool, and let's bring them up, pass them on to me. But we don't want to pass them on. I love the whole notion of the marketing team being involved, because frankly, they can be our greatest allies, but they can also be the most staunch and objectionable barrier to us actually doing this, because they want to control messaging. They don't want this hierarchical. It's too, it goes against what they're trying to accomplish. Of course, that doesn't help us, right? It should be in concert with what we're doing.
And I think that's, it's always so fun for me to do my projects, because, the first real like big meeting that we have after talking to people is this insight share out. And all of a sudden, both marketing team and the fundraising team have to respect what the supporter is saying. And for most teams, they haven't had that before. And then it's going like, okay, if that's what it is, where do we go from here together as one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think part of that, the takeaway from the first part of this conversation that I really hope that our listeners take away, especially those who are working in philanthropy right now, is that truly this is an us problem, not a them problem. And we talk about, a siloed approach to fundraising and the issues with that. And I think this is one of those hidden kind of consequences of taking a siloed approach. And I hope that people are kind of tuning into that fact. But there's another aspect, Leigh, that I've heard you speak on that I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk about, and it's about assumptions. The assumptions that are often made within our programs, that taking a different perspective, as you kind of are describing it or framing it, how that can really lead to some breakthrough kind of accomplishments for an organization. And I think you even have like a couple of examples that you could give to illustrate this idea.
Yeah, I've got loads of examples. Assumptions, proving or disproving assumptions, is like my favorite thing to do. But essentially, it is natural to all have assumptions. We just live in assumptions every day. That's what makes people people. But what gets really tricky with fundraising is when we base our strategies on assumptions, and very often these assumptions are things that we've had around the organization for decades. Like our donors want this. We can't give them that. We tried this once, it didn't work. Like all of these things, and what we really want to do is like live in now, right now. What are our supporters actually saying, and finding out whether these things are true, especially the things that are like sort of linchpins of our strategies. Because if you find out that something is not right, you need to change that. I'm trying to decide which example is my favorite to talk about. I'll talk about the UBC example. The issue was women's alumni sports are not giving nearly enough as men, and like this is like standard across any university, varsity programs. And the assumption is, okay, women like to give to hospitals, women like to give to food banks. They're like, that's just what it is. We can't really affect it. And when we went and did discovery and actually talked to people, what it was is that the way that they were speaking to both men's and women's programs was exactly the same. And it was all about give to this team today, give to these 25 players and this coach, give to these scholarships. And like the women would be like, well, I didn't get a scholarship when I played, or like that girl had a scholarship and she wasn't even that good, or I didn't even like my coach. Like there's all of that. But what they actually wanted was to be reconnected with the people that they played with and get the feeling of, these like good old happy days of how good it felt to play with their friends. And so it was like, okay, now we can adjust the communication, we can adjust even who it's coming from, and build the program. So like the ask was just done in a completely different way than the men's teams, and the results of this was phenomenal. It was like 6 times as much money for monthly donors. The highest gift ever was given. The first endowed fund was created, like just based on this piece. And it was just this assumption that it's like, well, we can't do anything about this, or like this is the way everyone should be talked to. Another example I have is just because it's so like free to implement. So it's working with the Green Party leadership race, and working with Enemy Paul. There were nine candidates like to be elected or in the election. And what we found is that the people who were most likely to support her were people who were very new to politics. And those people had no idea why politicians needed money. So when the callers made the asks, and this was during COVID, so it was just over the phone asks, they really didn't understand what it was. So after we had that insight, all we did was we created a little change in the talk track at the very beginning and said, like, are you new to politics, or are you, a seasoned veteran? I can't remember the language, but if they said they were new, you give them a little spiel about why politicians need money and then carry on with the rest of it. And she was the highest. So from the 12 months that they were fundraising prior to implementing this, 4 weeks later, they had doubled donations and they had tripled the number of donors. She was the highest funded candidate, and then she won the election. And it's like this very, very simple insight that you don't have to, we talked to like 25 people. You don't have to do a survey that 1,000 people respond to get this level of insight.
And it's what I just find it so fascinating, because having worked frontline in charities myself, I understand what it's like to get those inherited beliefs or those inherited values when you join an organization, and that so often we are sheep-like in just accepting them as they are put forward to us. That whole idea, you're right, we tried that, it didn't work. When did you try it? Who tried it? What were
I
the
know.
parameters? How was it tried? What could, do you know what I mean? Like, we're just kind of trained to go, okay, so that's off the table.
Mhm.
And I just love that, that female donors aren't going to give to sport because they're more focused on XYZ. No, in fact, they were athletes.
Mhm.
They will give to sport, but you just need to look at how you're asking. Like, it's communication, and it's curiosity again. You mentioned curiosity earlier, and it's just really trying to understand, what that engagement can look like, and where people are coming from. And it seems fundamental, and yet I think it's just like people hurdle over it and go to step 2 or step 3 before asking some of
Well,
those
if I
Mhm.
could, I mean, this is all, I love all this stuff. And one of the things that we often talk about with new people into the role of legacy giving professional within an organization. Now, sometimes they're experienced and they've worked in legacy giving elsewhere, plan giving. I prefer plan giving for professionals here. We call it plan giving. Legacy giving is a marketing position. But anyway, we say, or they're brand new to plan giving. Either way, go phone if there is a list of people who have identified themselves as having a gift in their will or some other planned gift for the organization. Phone them, and ask them why they did that. Like what led them to creating a gift. And they're really magical conversations. And what you learn in that moment is, why do donors give? Not what's the marketing position of the organization,
Mhm.
what's the pitch, what's the ask. It is, why did they do it? And that's really interesting. The other interesting thing we find, though, is that sometimes that information comes back and the priorities of the organization don't actually align with the priorities of the donors. Like the general concept of the organization is aligned, but what the organization has decided its charitable priorities are, the donors don't actually care about. And so the organization doesn't actually want to hear what the donors have to say about this, because they have determined what the priorities are. And they're going to spend actually more time trying to convince donors to come along with their priorities rather than embracing what these other priorities are that the donors bring to it, which is really, and we often say, look, plan giving donors are your partners. You have to listen to partners, whether they're partners in life, whether they're partners in business. If you don't listen, they get angry, or you won't find any new partners.
Mhm.
And for some reason, they'll do it in plan giving, but for the rest of it, they try to articulate out what's important rather than listening to what their donors are saying. And I think you're saying, Leigh, we have to listen to those people, and we have to get them to have inputs, because those inputs will turn them around and provide communication out that aligns with the values of those people who are our supporters.
Yeah, totally. And just hearing you talk makes me think about the community-centric fundraising approach, and how some people might think like, oh, this doesn't align with community-centric fundraising. And one of the things that I think about is, like, as an organization, you need to have I call them red lines. Like, your I will not go. This is what the organization does. These are our values. This is where it is. Everything else other than that is on the table. And
I will say this, though, that I don't think I've ever heard of a donor coming into an organization, let's say an environmental organization, and say, I'm going to give you $1 million to help build a pipeline. Like, that doesn't happen, right? I mean,
yeah.
the person comes in knowing pretty well what the organization does. It's a shade of difference. It's not a perpendicular or 180-degree turn away from the charitable mission of the organization. That rarely happens. I don't, and I would suggest that if it does happen, it would be something that Lisa would want to highlight. Donor Donor asks Nature Conservancy to sell land for high-rise apartments. Like, that would Lisa would be all over it. That's just not what goes on. People come to the organization, understand, like they might ask for things the organization doesn't do. For example, we do work with environmental charities that do not accept gifts of real estate if they have to hold them. They'll take them if they can sell them, but they will not hold them. But the donor and the organization are still aligned with, they want to protect the environment. It's just the articulation of it is very, very different. So anyway, it's
and it's also
red
like
lines
you
are
have,
pretty easy to draw, I suppose.
yeah, you have your red lines, you have your policies. Like if they're, I don't work in major gifts. I never have, so I don't know what those kinds of conversations are like. But I can imagine if you have this thing that's already set in stone, there's not going to be a whole lot of pushback on that. I don't know.
Fair enough.
Well, Leigh Sandison, Real Path, thank you for sharing some of your really kind of insightful kind of understandings about our donors and how we can learn and connect with them in a more fulsome way. I find the whole thing fascinating. I would never portray myself as a data geek, but I don't know if you consider yourself a data geek or if this is just a whole kind of different space. I guess it is kind of. It's not really about data, is it?
Well, we start with the big data. That's where and then we go, okay, what is it telling us? What it's telling us is what is happening. What it's not telling us is why or what people are feeling while that's happening. And the other thing I would say on data is data gives you like these various points. It doesn't give you these moments in between, and we need to talk to people to find out the moments in between. So
I love that. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
we
Lisa.
will
Thanks,
be back with our next topic very, very soon. You are back with Let's Get Real, Canadian Perspectives on Fundraising. We're having a really great discussion here. I'm Lisa McDonald, editor of Hillborn Charity E-News. We've got Leigh Sandison in the guest chair with Ed Sluga of PG Growth. Sorry, Leigh is with Real Path, if you haven't had occasion to meet her. I have something I want to talk to you guys about. It's an article that came to me this past week, courtesy of Give3, the organization, and John Hallward, who's the president of Give3. And they've recently done a study about Canadians' pro-social behavior. Now, what is that? Pro-social behaviors include such things as giving and volunteering, voting, donating blood, all of these things. So these pro-social behaviors are considered to help hold society together. Their top line on their study, I really captured my attention because the idea is, and how it relates to our conversation, is honestly that generosity, which is a term that comes up often in relation to philanthropy, is socially engineered. And okay, so again, maybe this doesn't seem like a news flash, but let's just, I'm going to just give you a little quick overview of a couple of the key points that came out of this study. So first of all, Canadians who are more connected tend to have higher well-being and much stronger pro-social behavior. Well connected. What does that mean? So these are people who are involved in groups and organizations, maybe in their neighborhoods, their faith communities, in clubs, things like that. These people are much more likely to give, to volunteer, and to help others. So they conclude that in this sense, connectedness is much less a private feeling and more like a social infrastructure. Okay, so that's interesting. And then they also talk about well-being. So as we know, unfortunately, there are many Canadians who are not doing equally well. So there's a wide variation in our society in terms of happiness and loneliness, financial security, just overall a sense of control over life. So stronger well-being is also associated with stronger connectedness and stronger pro-social behavior. So they go on to say that the study suggests that connectedness is the more direct bridge to generosity and civic action, but that the tie is strong, and it matters strategically and in kind of how we approach things. I think I want to like pause there for a second, because I feel like those are some kind of pretty big social constructs that we're talking about, and their connection to generosity. And Ed, you know, over the last, well, since we've been doing this pod, we've talked about a fact that there has been a lot of conversation in philanthropy, in fundraising circles specifically, data showing or discussing that generosity is declining, and you know, fewer Canadians are giving more, but that generosity as a whole is declining. This is why I'm interested in this idea. Is it declining? Is it some of our connectiveness is declining that's showing numbers, or is there a red herring here? And really, you know, this is not apples to apples. We're talking about different things. And Ed, I know you're going to have a lot to say on this, so I'm going to throw to Leigh first, because Leigh's new to the hot seat, new to this discussion, and I'd just love to hear what her kind of knee-jerk reaction is to that.
Yeah, so overall, I would say that I have talked with lots and lots of people over the last few years in the role that I have about kind of their giving habits, as well as interest in generosity at large. And I think it's really tough because the world we're in right now has so much fear, and everyone is terrified of like the unknown. So even for myself, I live in this constant like, what will happen with the world? Will I have enough money to pay this mortgage, and da 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 da, all of these things. I personally don't think that's because society at large is less generous. I think that we need to give people more opportunities to be more generous, and I think that generosity is not just in terms of money. I'll just give you this example. I had this conversation with this young person. They were probably like, low 20s, had gone through depression, super eco anxious, very, very worried about the state of the world. And this person found advocacy and all of a sudden started learning much more about it, being an advocate for a few different organizations, really feeling involved and useful. And all of a sudden, they were no longer in this depression. That like there was so much good that came out of it. And I think like for me personally, it's like, okay, what are all the different ways that organizations can and individuals within organizations can pull people in, so that there are more opportunities to demonstrate generosity outside of just donating, and the donations will come. So.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to start off by saying this, that years ago I was helping to publish a periodical that came out of the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. And I remember the editor coming and saying to me, "You'll be interested in this, Lisa, because of your journalistic background." The editor said, "Oh, there's a new study out of Denmark that says that a glass of red wine a night was heart healthy, and it was recommended." It was a study that came out. And she was very eager to publish this. And I was very eager for it to be true, thankfully. But I did take my journalistic background in that moment. I said, okay, that's great, but just find out who funded the study. That's all I want to know. I'm not throwing into question the scientists at the university in Denmark that did it. I'm not throwing into disrepute Denmark itself. Just tell me who funded it. And of course, it was the French wine industry. When you pulled it away, So what's the genesis of the information? And I do think that, and Leigh, I think you're saying this right now, there's a lot of things that are coming out which my eyes are telling me are not correct, right? Or that there's conflicting information. And I think giving is a social contract. So is a lot of things, right? And there's lots of really wonderful debate going on about why we're good people. Why do we try to be good people? Why do we fail in being good people? And some people try to tie it to one thing or another, religion, and or just the nature of being a human being. And what we end up with, I think, is a lot of confusion around it. I think for me, it's always, and this is a common thing we come back to, Lisa, in this, there's just so much more we need to learn about the way Canadians interact with generosity, which we don't know about. And in the absence of that information, a lot of people can do a little bit of half measure information gathering, or can fill those spaces up with some conjecture, some mythology, some half truths. And for me, it just brings me to ask more questions and suggest, as we have multiple times in this, in the series of podcasts this year, we just need somebody to kind of grab research by the scruff of the neck here and bring some good data to us, because I think that it's lacking right now, and I just don't know what to make of a lot of that information because of it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And, this might be just one of these quick hit topics that we give a little brush by and stow it away as good information for future discussion. But because I do find now I'm flagged whenever I see anything that talks about generosity. It really does kind of pique my interest, and I am interested to see what the discussion is and what the context is. And that's the case with this report. And again, we'll provide a link to it, so that anyone who would like to dive in and learn a little bit more about the findings and the context and the whys and wherefores of it. It was a Sector 3 Insights report. And I appreciate both your comments, and I really love that idea of giving more options for generosity. I believe that this is not a scarcity problem, and as a sector, as individual charities, we are often battling a scarcity mindset just across the board, and I feel again that there is again that fear, that underpinning of fear beneath it, that there just isn't enough to go around. And I think maybe we have to reframe it and ask some different questions, which is again, Ed, what you're talking about is be curious about the source, ask questions, and Leigh, go to the people, right? Go to the people and really get the answers, and then make some decisions. So thank you for your input, both of you. Again, we're getting real about Canadian perspectives on fundraising, and we appreciate the listeners listening in, and would love to hear their thoughts back too on this idea of generosity and where it comes from and where it's going when it comes to Canadian philanthropy.